For most people, you're going to build your wealth over time, and it should be a very natural process. And this is the purpose of capitalism. We're in a capitalist society, and how do you you need to acquire capital, and that means like buying index funds where you're owning businesses all across the US or all across the world, whether that means owning farmland or that means owning physical real estate. There's a lot of ways to do it, but at the end of the day, you have to own some sort of capital.
I received a question from Eric on Instagram, and here it is. No kids, 32 years old. My wife and I are maxing out our Roth IRAs each month and wondering what to do next investment-wise. My employer 401k has no match, and the expense ratios are really high, around 1.5 to almost 2%. Eric, thank you so much for reaching out on Instagram. If you guys want to connect with me on Instagram, I'm at Marriage, Kids, and Money. Love answering questions like this on the show, so shoot me a note there. Shoot me a voicemail, marriagekidsandmoney.com/voicemail. Eric, congratulations on maxing out your Roth IRAs. That is huge, and it's a surefire way just to have a great nest egg when you retire. So kudos there. Now, you are wondering what to do next, especially with not so great 401k situation at work. That kind of does stink with no match and the high expense ratios. So to help me answer your question, I've invited Nick Maggiulli on the show today. Nick is the Chief Operating Officer and Data Scientist at Ritholtz Wealth Management, where he oversees operations across the firm and provides insights on business intelligence. He's also the author of the new book, Just Keep Buying, Proven Ways to Save Money and Build a Wealth, which is out now, everybody. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thanks for having me on, Andy.
Absolutely. Well, let's help answer Eric's question here right away. If he and his wife are maxing out their Roth IRAs, which is a great thing, what other smart investment options are there out there for them?
There's a couple different things they could do. It really depends on kind of where they expect to spend money. Obviously there's things like health savings accounts, which you can put money into if you have expected medical expenses. If you don't have any sort of expected medical expenses, then you can do things like, I would say, just having a brokerage account. Like, that's post-tax money. You just have it there, and there's a lot of flexibility there. So I don't necessarily think you need to load up on more and more, non-taxable accounts. Like, given the situation with the 401k, that is, it's kind of unfortunate. As you said, Andy, it's unfortunate that they don't offer a match. And on top of that, if they even were to match, like, all the investment choices are pretty high in terms of the fees, right? So I would worry less about that. And especially because they have no kids, they probably might need a little bit more flexibility in the next few years in case they have children, or if they need to buy a house or whatever. I don't know their exact situation, but depending on that, I think a brokerage account is great. And we can kind of get into why a brokerage account can be great in a second here.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I think there's lots of people out there cheering for the Roth IRA, which is great, and but a regular taxable brokerage might suffice for a lot of people. Can you talk about, I guess, the differences and why one might go the other way?
Yeah, so there's something that a lot of people don't know. It's like, this is just for a single individual. If your only income, so let's say you're not working, let's say you're retired or something. If your only income is capital gains, so let's just say dividends, and you're selling stocks that have gains, right? Up to $40,000 is tax-free, 0% tax rate, right? So let's say you have $1 million portfolio, and it's all, let's say, mostly capital gains. You've been investing a long time. So if you were to, normally, if you have normal income, normal working year, if you sell that, usually you have to pay 15% because you have some sort of income. But if you have no other income and you're just doing that, you can sell up to $40,000 a year, and the tax is zero, right? And if you include the standard deduction, now you're at about $50,000 for an individual. Now you have a couple can sell, can basically have double that, right? $100,000 a year tax-free. Now, I know I don't want to speak for any of your listeners or anything, but that's a decent amount of money. $100,000 a year tax-free. That's more than a lot of people I know in the city spend. That's probably more than a lot of couples even spend. $100,000. Remember, this is after tax money, right? So I think a brokerage account has a lot more benefits than people realize. So just don't. I know it's post-tax money, and so you're not going to get some of those tax savings. But in theory, if you are, if you're retired and that's the only income you have, like, you can get tax-free. It's almost like having a non-taxable account on the growth in your earnings, right?
Yeah. It makes sense. So I guess I'll ask, why would anybody do a Roth IRA then if it has that such a benefit there? Because with a Roth IRA, you can't really touch it until retirement age, but taxable brokerage, you could.
This is a good question, but the issue is people probably are going to earn income. And so if you're earning income and you start pulling money out, like all of your brokerage account, like the cap gains, you do have to pay. You have to pay 15%, right? So, and usually, or if it's really high, it's 20%, et cetera, right? But let's just say 15%. So what you're really avoiding is that 15%. So for example, in my book, I discuss a lot of these like tax things in one of the chapters, and one of the things I found is roughly how big is that, avoiding that 15% long-term capital gain, how much is that worth like on average per year, right? And so I run a simulation and it's about 0.7% a year. So what that basically means is if your 401k is charging you 0.7% more than what you would be charged in like a brokerage account by picking your own funds or whatever, then all of the tax benefit is wiped out basically, right? So and there's a lot of 401ks, as in this case with Eric's, where he's paying 1.52%. All you need is 0.7%. Anything above 0.7 and your kind of tax benefit is wiped out. So like the trade-off is like, some sort of 401k versus a brokerage account. And it's like, if the fees are high enough in the 401k, there's really no point in doing that, right? Above the match at least, right? So this is all above the match money, right? So just something to keep in mind.
I think that's a really good point for Eric. So if he's feeling any sort of, well, maybe I should still do the 401k with these high fees, I mean, it sounds like that's a big no, right?
Yeah, I would say definitely not. I mean, with a match, I could see it even with it kind of sucks, but like with no match, like no offense, I would just not do that at all. I would keep my money on the outside. It's more flexible. I think it's gonna be better for your life overall, Eric.
Oh no! Now, well, let's say Eric is really smart and he listens to financial podcasts all the time. Is there a conversation that he could have with his employer to say, "Look at this. I mean, this is ridiculous. What you're doing. How can we improve? How can we improve our situation?" Have you talked to anybody about that? Kind of approaching your employer to say, I don't know, this has got to be better.
I mean, it's a tough conversation to have, but like, unless you can get a bunch of employees together, say, hey, can we fix this? I'm guessing it's a cost issue. I'm wondering I don't know how 401ks are set up in that way. Like, does someone get a kickback? Is it because like, why were those plans chosen, right? Because there's a lot of options out there that are far, far cheaper, right? So maybe there was a reason. Maybe the people they knew that got the 401k set up, they're old friends. And he's like, well, I'm just giving them business. And so because of that, they end up having it being in these high fee plans. I don't know. And that's the thing. It's really touchy subject, but like, yeah, if you want to, I would say, why are we in this? And there's probably a reason that makes sense. No employer would just want to do that to their employees. There's always usually some sort of motive for why this is happening. And you have to figure out what that motive is.
Yeah. And so for the people, this isn't the first time I've seen this too. I mean, lots of people have these high fees with their 401ks, and it just, I don't know. I guess having been in the conversation for a while, it just seems like a shame, especially for people with the retirement crisis we've got going on here and people being prepared. So let's talk about just maybe having a general balance. We're talking about the benefits of Roth, the benefits of taxable, maybe even the benefits of taking advantage of a pre-tax 401k if people do have decent options and a match. Is there a right percentage for people as they're looking to kind of have some, I guess, diversification across taxable accounts or the tax situation in general? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think you definitely should have some in non-taxable, whether that's a pre-tax 401k or a Roth, like kind of you've already paid the income tax. Because remember, when we talk about taxable versus non-taxable, what we're usually talking about is capital gains, right? It's like with a pre-tax 401k or a Roth 401k, that's the income tax component. That has nothing to do with the growth on the earnings, right? And all that growth on the earnings is going to get taxed again, which is the capital gain. So I just want to make sure we're all clear on that. So like pre-tax versus Roth, that's a big thing already in terms of the income tax you pay and when you pay it. I personally prefer the traditional, which is the pre-tax, where it's like, because you can play tax games later. You have a little bit more flexibility on where you pay your taxes. For example, I'm in a high tax state now, New York. If I know I'm going to retire in a place like Florida or Texas, where I know there's no state income tax, there's a tax arbitrage to be played there. Well, in retirement, I'm avoiding the high New York state taxes, but then later maybe I'll pay a lower state tax in another state. That's an option, right? So that's just with the income side. But with the capital gain side, you have to think about like, okay, how much is it worth for that benefit? And I just said 0.7% is a rough proxy. What percentage your assets should be in which? I don't know. I've done around 50-50. And like, it's like half's for you, half's for future you. I use that 50-50 split a lot because there's I found a lot of different things in finance where the 50-50 split actually ends up working, but I don't know. There's no right answer. I mean, it's technically you could have it all outside, all post-tax money in like a brokerage account. And I said, there are options you can use and there's a lot more flexibility there. But if you're ever tempted to touch money and stuff, having it kind of locked up makes it a little bit harder to get to and could help you if you have like discipline issues with spending. Absolutely.
Yeah. Having options, I guess, is good for everything. Diversification can't hurt, right? And when we're talking about, the tax situation or where our taxes might be when we want to retire, we don't know how much income we're going to be having or what the tax situation in our country might be. So having some flexibility there is good. Nick, as we're having this conversation, there's kind of a down market right now going on, and people are a little confused about what to invest in and where to go. And there's lots of noise out there about what to do, what not to do. What advice would you have for people as they're sort of deciding what to invest in if they're getting started right now?
Yeah, so I always say there's a lot of ways to get rich. There's only a couple ways to go broke, and we can get into that in a second, but there's really a lot of ways to get rich. You can get rich in real estate, you can get rich in stocks, owning stock index fund, low cost stock index funds. You can get rich with farmland. I've heard of people investing in royalties. So there's a lot of options. I don't want to say you have to do this, but I would say explore the options, look at the risk profiles, kind of look at how these things have declined in the past. Imagine yourself going through that, living through that. Think of it in dollar terms, not just percentages, right? So like, if I have $100,000 portfolio, would I be okay seeing it go to $50,000 while, in a crazy event like '08 or 2000, 2003, et cetera, right? So think about that and then pick the options that you think that are let you sleep at night. That's really the key, right? It's like figuring out what works for you. I don't want to tell you go buy, S&P 500 index fund because that's not right for everyone, right? I don't want to say go buy international stocks because some people aren't going to see the logic in that either. So I don't think there's any right answer, but there are wrong answers. So it's just like try to avoid the very, very risky, high leverage, those types of things. Avoid those type of investments and just pick things that have a standard level of risk, which is like market risk. I think that's fine. Anything beyond that is where you can start to get into trouble.
I think that's a great answer. I would say, taking the time to educate yourself on what's out there, and then kind of realizing that there's no one size fits all for everybody, and everybody's situation is very unique in that case. Well, let's talk about just general mistakes that you see people making out there that maybe they could avoid through our conversation. What are some of the biggest mistakes with regard to investing you've seen?
I think, I just mentioned one of them, levering up too much. Anything that could lead to ruin is usually bad. So whether that means high costs, so like paying high fees, spending too much money, just having really out of control spending where you just have no like discipline at all, right? Obviously for a lot of people, they don't have high income, so they don't really have a choice. But there's people who have high income and very high spending, and they could rein it back. That's one thing. So think about the costs. And the other one is, I said, high risk. So anytime you do any sort of high risk or a concentration of risk, that's where things can usually go wrong. And risk doesn't have to be like, I bought a bunch of crazy levered funds. It could be like, I used to be invested in a 60/40 and I got scared and I sold everything and moved to cash. That is a risky move. And it's not risky in the short term, but in the long term it is, because if you keep doing those types of moves, like imagine you did that in COVID in early March 2020, right? Move to cash. Like, I'm going to wait till the dust settles. Well, 6 months later, you're at an all-time high. You just missed one of the biggest rallies and then one of the quickest rallies we've ever seen. So that's risky, right? You just lost money without realizing it. You didn't, like, your dollar amount didn't go down, but you lost where you could have been if you hadn't sold. You know what I'm saying? So you have to think about like your opportunity cost as well, which is like what you gave up to make that decision. So I would say risk works both ways, and to avoid the high risk and the high cost scenarios.
Yeah, I would say based on your book title, you are a fan of just continuing to buy and taking advantage of the market, dollar cost averaging. Talk to us about why you like this mantra, just keep buying.
Because it's easy and you can follow it through thick and thin. And at the end of the day, people need, I just say there's no perfect answer to everything. I think the one thing I can say is the long-term, accumulation of assets is how you build wealth, right? And I think for a lot of people, it's not like we have this one, we don't are all business owners and have a massive IPO and just get all this money at once. For most people, you're going to build your wealth over time, and it should be a very natural process. And, this is the purpose of capitalism. We're in a capitalist society, and, you need to acquire capital. And that means like buying, index funds where you're owning businesses all across the US or all across the world, whether that means owning farmland or that means owning physical real estate. There's a lot of ways to do it, but at the end of the day, you have to own some sort of capital, right? It's the only way, I think, to consistently get rich in this country. I mean, there are other ways. Of course, you can try and be a sports star. You can try and be a famous actor, actress. But at the end of the day, those are less likely that to get to build some sufficient level of wealth to live a decent life compared to just buying over time a diverse set of income producing assets.
I love it. Talk to us about this new book. Where can people get it? Tell us what it's about, and then where can people connect with you?
Yeah, so the subtitle is Proven Ways to Save Money and Build Your Wealth. And the premise of it is like, there's a lot of beliefs in personal finance and investing, which I think are kind of like folklore or myth, or people just came up with them and no one actually tested it with data. So it's like a data-driven guide to personal finance and investing. But don't worry, it's very accessible. My 75-year-old grandmother read it and she said she understood 70% of it, despite not being anyone who's ever invested a day in her life, really. So that's my tribute to, like, there's a lot of stories, a lot of fun stuff, good anecdotes, things in there that are useful. You can find it on Amazon, you can find it in Barnes & Noble, just keep buying. And also, if you have questions for me, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Dollars and Data. I try to answer every DM I get, so feel free to reach out and ask me about that. But yeah, that's kind of what the book's about, just like a data-driven guide. I answer a bunch of questions, really. People have questions like, how do I save up for a house? I answer that question. How do I do this? And I just kind of answer those questions. Each chapter is just a question being answered, basically. So.
I think that's a great premise, because I think a lot of folks, myself included, just got into investing, got into personal finance based on sayings, based on things that people said you should do, right? And having a breakdown of what the actual data shows and how you can move across this investing journey in a successful way sounds like a great book to grab everybody. Nick, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me on.